Ever since I was a very young lad, I always pondered the existence of extraterrestrials, perhaps like all of us from a certain age. For me, growing up in the northeast of England, no older than 10, the existence of aliens, or UFOs for that matter, was as mysterious and uncertain as the existence of God himself. Even the existence of other things like vampires, werewolves, Bigfoot, or the Loch Ness Monster, Nessie as we Brits like to call her, was either as likely or unlikely to exist. As that young blonde-haired boy with pointy ears, the only aliens I knew of were from the movies I watched. Whether it was War of the Worlds or Independence Day, these movies could only imagine the possibility of alien life and the consequences of that, without providing the real thing. But by the year 2012 and barely into secondary school, it would seem I may finally have my answer, whether I really accepted it or not. I have already recently shared both of my childhood UFO experiences before, but being a writer by trade, I thought I'd use my craft to revisit them in the hope of fleshing out as much of these two mysteries as possible, so I can decisively decide if what I saw as a boy was indeed real or not. For the reader, it will also be up to you to decide if the events I witnessed happened as I saw them, or if my childhood imagination got the better of me, or if I'm really just full of it. Not that it's really worth much of a damn without any evidence, but the following of what I'm about to tell you did in fact happen as I saw it, and to the best of my recollection. By the year 2012, I had been growing up in the East Riding of Yorkshire for the past 7 years, in the average-sized, but oddly named port town of Goole. This town was of no particular interest, except perhaps for its two landmarks, two rather tall water towers, humorously named the Salt and Pepper Pots. Settled beside a tributary river, Goole was sparsely surrounded by patches of farmland and large crop fields, perhaps the perfect setting for a UFO story, like the crop circle stories I knew of in the United States. However, my first UFO experience wouldn't happen in some field on the outskirts of town, but in the town itself. More precisely, it would happen no more than 100 meters outside of my bedroom window. Unfortunately, I don't remember the precise year this first event took place, although I do know it happened in either 2011 or 2012. Therefore, I was either in my final year of primary school or my nerve-wracking first year of secondary. Regardless, I would have been around 11 years old. As a child, and even through my teens, I was always a bad sleeper, either getting no sleep at all or waking up in the very early hours of the morning. It was on one of these early mornings that I woke up to my silent, pitch-black bedroom, with everyone else in my house fast asleep. Not having an alarm clock or phone to tell the time, I wondered what time of night it was, perhaps to know how much more sleep I could get. As I said, this was all a regular occurrence for me, as was peeking my head through the curtain next to my bedside to see if the sky was still dark. By looking out from my bedroom window, I would have seen my 20-meter-long garden, which I regularly played football on, as well as the neighboring house on the other side of my back garden fence. But what I then saw, in the short distance over the roof of this particular neighboring house, would be a complete first. What I saw, flying, gliding, or simply just moving, 100 meters or less away from my bedroom window, was what I can only describe as a flying saucer-shaped-like object. In the past, I described this object as the most stereotypical flying saucer shape you could ever see or imagine. The night was too dark to see its color, but I remember it making a distinctive humming noise as it moved over the town beneath it. But how I knew this object was saucer-shaped was because as it moved, or indeed hummed, a single row of small bright lights moved around and around. At that age, if I imagined a flying saucer, I would have pictured a particularly large craft, but this object seemed no larger than a car or a small van. The speed at which this thing moved was not particularly fast or slow, but fast enough so that what I was seeing was gone in the next 5 to 10 seconds. Not knowing if what I had just seen was in fact real or just a dream, I pinched and slapped myself, hard enough to wake up almost anyone. But I was awake, and as you can imagine, I was in disbelief. If any one thing, paranormal or otherwise, that you didn't already know or believe in just appeared to you, confirming absolute proof, whether it was God or Jesus Christ, a heaven or a hell, even ghosts, and yes, aliens, I think anyone would have had the very same first reaction. This can't be real. I must be dreaming. Do I need to question the meaning and my own understanding of life? That was the reaction I remember having, rational in the face of the unbelievable. If you were to ask me what I did next, having witnessed such an extraordinary and incomprehensible sight, you'd be surprised to learn that what I did was simply lay back down on my pillow and eventually fall back to sleep. You'd probably be surprised, but that's what I did. The very next day, with the event of last night still fresh in my mind, I found my mum putting laundry away in her and my dad's bedroom. Feeling comfortable enough to tell my mum almost anything, even which girls at school I fancied, I told her exactly what I saw the night before. Like any parent would, having been told a fictitious-sounding story by your young child, my mum showed no indication of surprise or even shock, instead responding in the lines of, "Oh wow," or "Oh really," as she carried on folding the laundry on the bed. I asked her if she believed me and she said she did, but even before I confessed to her what I saw, I knew she wouldn't. Maybe I just needed to get what I saw that night instantly off my chest, and telling my mum would be the best way to do it, without facing ridicule from my friends, being laughed at by my sister, or simply just ignored by my dad. As unbelievable as this story that I told my mum was, I knew what I saw that night was real, and I think most people on this planet know when they are dreaming and when they are not, and I just knew I wasn't. If this was the case, then what I saw from my bedroom window that night was indeed a flying saucer, a UFO. It may then come as a surprise to whomever is reading this, as it did for me, to learn that despite bearing witness to what appeared to be an unforgettable UFO experience, I had almost completely forgotten about what happened that night, not fully recollecting what I saw until the latter part of last year. Was I in denial at what I saw? Did my mind just choose to repress the memory of it? When I first wrote of this experience only recently, an online user speculated as much to me that my young brain couldn't comprehend what I had seen and therefore repressed the whole experience. But like I have already said, this would not be my only potential UFO encounter, and the next time, thankfully, I wouldn't be alone. During the summer of 2012, and having just graduated primary school, my 6 friends and I ventured almost every day to the exact same place along the outskirts of town. We had found a field with a small adjoining wooded area, and very quickly, this area became our brand new den, which we spent most days climbing trees or playing tag hide and seek. At the very end of our den was a 4 feet wide creek, separating the field we played in from the town's rugby club that was also on the outskirts of town. The reason I bring up this creek is because my friends and I, upon discovering it, would also spend a lot of our time there that summer. We enjoyed playing this juvenile game where one of us had to leap over to the embankment on the other side, or cross via a narrow wooden plank we found to make a bridge. Being the attention seeker I was at that age, I was always willing to jump up and over to the other side. In fact, I was the best. Anyone else who tried mostly ended up with 1 foot in the less than sanitary water. Several months later, however, and nearly halfway through our first year of secondary school, our tradition of jumping creeks and field hide and seek had sadly become far less frequent with the ongoing school year. That was until one afternoon, or maybe it was evening, I don't remember, my friends and I ventured back to our den and the nearby creek, crossing over and entering behind the grounds of the rugby club. These grounds consisted of 2 large rugby fields and a smaller patch of grass by the side, which is where the creek had led us. What the 5 or 6 of us were doing there, I'm not sure. We did sometimes use the grounds to play tag hide and seek, or other times we just explored, but what I remember next from that afternoon evening, in whichever autumn month it was we caught sight of something flying in the not-too-distant sky and heading directly our way. At first, we must have thought it was nothing more than an airplane or Royal Air Force craft, as our town had them passing the sky on a regular basis. The closer this thing got, however, the more it started to look like something else. Something none of us had probably ever seen before. It started to look like what our juvenile, imaginative minds could only interpret as an alien spacecraft of some kind, so much so that one of my friends said something in the lines of, "Is that a UFO?" as though speaking the minds of all of us. Whatever this thing was, it was still coming our way and flying curiously low, as close as it was now. I think we were all waiting for this craft to visually clarify for us that it was some kind of plane. But what I can still remember vividly is this thing being directly over our heads, and my next thought while looking up to it was, "That is a UFO, an alien spaceship," before any other thought could then enter my mind, whether it be one of awe, dread, or panic. I hear one of my friends a meter or 2 behind me shout, "Shit!" By the time I look behind me, all I see is every one of my friends running away towards the embankment of the creek, as though running for their lives. If I recall, it was just me and my friend George who didn't. I'm sure I thought of running too, but I must have been in such awe or disbelief at what I was seeing, and even if I did run, I thought it was sure to abduct me. Whether I ran or stood right where I was, I felt convinced there was nothing I could really do. If it was going to take me, it would. When I turn away from my friends to look back up at what I see to be an alien craft, what I instead see is some kind of low-flying military jet, turned slightly away from us now and flying off. My friends also must have noticed it was just a military jet, as they had stopped running and now joined slowly back with the rest of the group, realizing there was nothing to be afraid of anymore. Although my memory of the following conversation is hazy, we did discuss what we had just seen, with every one of us indeed thinking it was a UFO at first, only to then realize it was a military jet. I don't remember the conversation going any further from there, or what we even did afterwards for that matter. We probably just went back into town and played football at the park. However, something I discreetly remember to this day is that in the next 2 years that I still knew them, before packing up my things and moving abroad with my family, is that not a single one of us ever talked about the experience again, not even for a laugh. There was no, remember when we all thought we saw a UFO, but it was really just a plane. I did drift away from most of these friends by the following year, as we were all in separate classes in school and played for rival football teams, so perhaps they did talk about the experience except without me there. In my last year before moving abroad, however, I did reacquaint myself with my best friend Kai, who was there that day at the rugby club. We had drama class together that year, and it was in these lessons that we learnt all about these terrifying urban legends, in which the class afterwards had to dramatically perform them. It was also from these lessons that Kai and myself became obsessed with urban legends, so much so that we would watch scary YouTube videos about them. But in that same year, enjoying to be scared together, not once, to my recollection, did either of us ever bring up that experience at the rugby club. Not once. Kai was one of my friends I saw run away that day, so he was obviously scared by the craft as well, but I never brought it up either. In fact, I think I almost forgot about the experience altogether, just like my first experience a year prior to it. But what's even crazier to me is that I seem to forget about both of these experiences, regardless of what they were, for the next 10 years. If you're wondering why I am talking about this second experience, even though it only turned out to be a military jet, it's because since recollecting my first experience recently and becoming aqua-tinted with UFO lore and history, some things about that day at the rugby club just don't seem to add up to me. Number one, if this was an RAF jet, then it was flying dangerously low, potentially 100 to 160 feet above us. From what I've researched, RAF jets can fly as low as 100 feet, but when it comes to populated areas containing vehicles and civilians, then it can go no lower than 500 feet. If this was a jet, it may not have even seen my friends and I, but it was still flying in and around a populated town. Number two, I was 100% convinced that this craft flying over me was an alien craft, 100 feet or so above me, and that is what I believed I was seeing. It was only when I looked to my friends running away and then back again that it was somehow now a military jet. Number three, and perhaps the most confusing aspect of this experience, is that the RAF jet, from my recollection, made barely any noise. From what I've read, RAF jets at only 25 meters after takeoff are so loud it can rupture your eardrums. Like I said, this jet was no more than 160 feet above us, yet I could still hear my friend cuss the S-word behind me. Having recently fallen down the UFO rabbit hole in the past year, I did come across one video, whether real or a hoax, of a spinning, bright, glowing light in the clear day sky that slowly morphed into a standard airliner. Although in the video, this transition took the better part of a minute, I then wondered if the craft I saw that day could possibly have done the same thing. However, when I previously shared my experiences online, only several months ago, one person rationally suggested that the craft I saw could have in fact been the Avro Vulcan XH-558, which was active in 2012 and based at Doncaster Sheffield Airport, not that far from Goole. The Avro Vulcan is indeed a very odd-looking military craft, with wings resembling something like you would see out of Star Trek. Maybe that's why it was called the Avro Vulcan. From what I remember, in the few seconds that I fully believed this thing flying over me to be a UFO, it didn't strike me as flying saucer-shaped, not like the one I had seen a year before. Regardless, whatever this craft was, it definitely struck me as alien at first, and maybe what I thought I was seeing was a different kind of alien craft, or maybe it really was just a military jet, an oddly shaped one at that. If you were to ask me now, in the year 2024, if what I saw in 2012 was either a UFO or simply an RAF jet, for the sake of rationality, I would say it was just a jet, whose strange appearance merely confused a group of 12-year-old boys. However, to conclude the speculation of this second experience, I will leave you with this. Not long after posting of my experiences, an online user advised me to share my story with a specific UFO investigator who particularly focuses on UFO activity in the Yorkshire area. Feeling in need of answers, I emailed this very same investigator. Intrigued by my story, he requested a conversation over the phone with me, and after relaying this second experience with him, highlighting how this jet was supposedly flying dangerously low without producing much sound at all, he simply said to me, "That wasn't a military craft." If you were also to ask me whether I believe in aliens, I would say that I do. Not because of what I saw. I still don't know if what I saw was real. I do believe in aliens, or whatever they are. There are countless theories. Simply because since I first fell down this UFO rabbit hole, learning of the experiences of many others, the existence of extraterrestrials no longer appears irrational to me. After all, can we really be the only intelligent beings to exist in this universe? The answer is, I don't know. But what I do know is that for me, like it will be for countless others, the truth is still out there somewhere. Maybe even right here on our very own planet. I'm going to start this by saying I really have no idea what's going to happen now. I'm not even sure why I'm telling you all this, but here I am, writing down the most insane shit I've ever experienced. Maybe it's to warn you, or maybe it's because at this point, it's the only thing I can do to hold on to what's left of my sanity. Either way, you need to know. So, buckle up. If you think this is going to be some neat little tech story about some gadgets or breakthrough devices, you're in for a surprise. This is not that. I'm in a nightmare, and I am the one who created it. Let's rewind to where it all started. You've probably heard of NeuroSync, right? If you haven't, you've been living under a rock, or you've been too busy binge-watching reality TV. NeuroSync isn't just a company. It's a revolution in the making, at least. That's what they kept telling us. I wasn't just some cog in the wheel. No, I was part of something that could change the world. You know, the type of hype that gets you all hot and bothered, like some kind of Steve Jobs-level prophecy. And yeah, I drank the Kool-Aid. I had to, or I wouldn't have been hired in the first place. NeuroSync's latest project was called Neuralink. They weren't just creating another app that syncs with your phone to remind you when to breathe or drink water. No, they were creating something that could actually tap into the deepest parts of your mind. Imagine this. A set of earbuds, but they're not just for music. These bad boys connect to your subconscious, your dreams. They were marketed as a tool for lucid dreaming, where you could literally control your dreams. Think about that for a second. No more of those weird, nonsensical dreams where you're naked in public or getting chased by someone you don't even know. You could choose the dream, shape it, direct it. At first it seemed like a joke. Sure, we could do all that with our minds, but tech and dreams, that's like trying to program your brain to be a computer, right? But then, I saw it. I saw the first prototype, and it didn't just work. It worked. Like really well. The dreamscape wasn't just a controlled environment, it was almost real. The sensations, the colors, the feelings. It was like entering another world. At first we tested it on ourselves, naturally. I mean, I had to. It was my project, my baby. Max Harris, the guy who's about to change the world of human consciousness. We went through the usual first tests are always glitchy phase. It was clunky, sure, but not unexpected. Some people couldn't get the device to connect properly. Others, like me, found the experience jarring at first. It wasn't just controlling your dreams. It was controlling everything your mind could create. But as the weeks went by, it started to get smoother. And then, well, that's when things started to go south. There was this one guy, Greg. He was one of the beta testers, just some random guy who signed up for the program. He was a photographer, into the whole deep dive, inner exploration thing. He was excited about the possibilities, maybe even more than I was. He hit me up after a couple of days, all enthusiastic, talking about how the dreamscape was incredible. He said he was having lucid dreams like he'd never had before, and he was controlling every little thing. It seemed pretty standard. Everyone else had the same thing to say, until he didn't. I'll never forget the voicemail he sent. He wrote it like it was just another check-in. but you could feel it in his words. There was something off. Something was gnawing at him. Max. I could sense that he was shivering through his voice. There's something weird going on with these dreams. I thought I was controlling everything, but there's this shadow. It's been following me for the last 2 nights. It's not part of the dream, man. It's real. I can't get rid of it. Let me know if this is I should be worried about, man. Call me when you can. At first I thought it was just an anomaly, a glitch, or maybe some kind of weird personal anxiety playing out in his subconscious. But Greg wasn't the only one. More people started coming in with the same thing. A dark, faceless figure that just hung around in the periphery of their dreams. And that's when the red flags started popping up like fireworks on the 4th of July. I don't even know how to explain this part because I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But I'll tell you what happened anyway. I connected to the Neuralink system for the first time in weeks. I hadn't really needed to. Everything seemed to be running fine, so why mess with something that wasn't broken? But when I logged in, the atmosphere was different. Almost oppressive. It was like I was walking into a room where everyone had just been fighting. And then I saw it. That figure. It was there, just standing in the corner of my dream. Not moving, but it felt like it was staring straight at me, like it knew me. And in that moment I felt something I had never felt before, a cold, creeping terror. I tried to shake it off, like, come on, Max, it's just a dream, right? You're in control. But I wasn't. The longer I stared at that thing, the more real it became. I tried to move, tried to wake up, but nothing happened. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my body refused to respond, and that's when I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, like it was coming from the very fabric of the dream itself. Max. It wasn't my voice. I didn't say it, but I felt it in my bones. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, like they were carved into the back of my mind. The thing, this entity, whatever it was, stepped closer, slowly, and then everything went black. I woke up, my heart hammering, sweat drenched in fear, but I wasn't in control. I was still there, stuck in the dream. I know this sounds crazy, I know it, but I felt it. That thing, that shadow was aware, and worse, it was me. I didn't know it then, but that's the only way I can describe it now. There was this sudden shift, like my dream had turned against me. I tried to wake up, but I couldn't. My mind was stuck. I thought it was just a glitch in the system, a problem with the device. But the testers weren't experiencing glitches anymore. They were experiencing things, and they weren't the good things. That's when I started to panic. I mean, I had always been the guy in control, right? The one who fixed things, the guy who had all the answers. But now, I was just another freaked-out tester, stuck in the system. Worse, I wasn't alone. The other testers were experiencing the same thing, and they were scared. The feedbacks were flooding in, each one more desperate than the last. Greg's? He had stopped responding to our emails and calls altogether. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't just creating the dreamscape, I was living it. And I wasn't the only one. I couldn't stop thinking about how we'd built Neuralink. We had studied lucid dreaming techniques, sure, but we also dug into the deep subconscious. We didn't just want people to control their dreams. We wanted to tap into the places that were beyond consciousness, the places where your mind goes when you're not aware of it. And in doing so, we might have opened something we couldn't close. I didn't realize it at first, but the more I started to think about the dreamscape, and the more I dug into the device, the more I realized I wasn't just designing tech that let people control their dreams. I wasn't just tinkering with how the mind works. I was breaking into it. And there's a difference between the two. Breaking into something isn't the same as controlling it. When you break into something, you risk disturbing things you aren't meant to touch. You risk opening doors that should remain closed. Let me tell you about a moment that changed everything for me. I was in the middle of a meeting with the team, still trying to act like everything was fine. They were asking me about the latest round of feedback, the general performance of the device, whether we'd ironed out all the bugs. It was just another normal day, or at least it should have been, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That figure, that thing that was always there lurking in the corners of my dream. It wasn't just haunting me anymore, it was haunting everyone. Max, Greg had said in his last voicemail, it's not just a glitch. It's not just a bug. I feel like something's watching me. I'm scared, man. And that scared me. Because it was exactly what I had been feeling. The thing had been watching me too. But worse, It felt like it knew me, like it was hunting me, like it was calling to me, trying to drag me deeper into whatever this place was. Anyway, so there I was, sitting in the meeting room, trying to ignore the fact that I was still tethered to this nightmare world. Max, Lila, one of the project leads, called me out. Did you hear me? I blinked, momentarily startled. Sorry, I was just lost in thought. Lila raised an eyebrow. She wasn't fooled. What's going on? Max, you're distracted, more than usual. I forced a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. Nothing, just thinking about the best way for us to be dealing with that bug. No big deal. I had to keep it together, right? I couldn't let the team see what was happening. If they figured out that this was more than just a bug, they'd pull the plug on everything. No one would understand that this wasn't just some technical glitch. This was something else, something that was breaking into the very fabric of reality itself. But that's when it hit me. I couldn't shake the thought. The more I thought about the entity, about that cold, faceless shadow that stalked the edges of my dreams, the more I realized something. The entity wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't some freak accident. It was a manifestation of my own mind, or at least that's what I started to believe. This was my brain's way of telling me that I'd gone too far. I know how this sounds, but stick with me for a second. I had always assumed that dreams were just random, right? I mean, they didn't make sense. They were supposed to be a mishmash of everything that happened during the day, our brain's way of sorting through all the junk we didn't need. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear. Dreams weren't random. They had a purpose, and maybe, just maybe, they were our brain's way of creating boundaries, of keeping us from breaking our own consciousness. You see, I started to realize that the dreamscape wasn't just some shared space. It wasn't like we were all in different rooms or using separate VR headsets. No, we were all in the same place, our minds, our subconscious, all bleeding into one another. I don't know how or why, but the more people I talked to, the more I began to see the same thing. The dreamscape was not a personal, individual space. It was a shared dimension. And that's when I had the thought that scared the shit out of me. What if this isn't just a lucid dream? What if dreams are another dimension altogether? A place our conscious minds can't comprehend because they're too tied to the laws of reality we live in. But when we sleep, when we dream, that's when we step into a different world. One where time doesn't work the same way, where the rules of reality are completely thrown out the window. And this entity, the one I kept seeing in the corners of my mind, it wasn't just some figment of imagination. It was our subconscious mind trying to warn us. It was our brain's way of telling us, don't go too far, don't dig too deep, or you'll break something. I should have figured it out sooner. I should have paid more attention to the warnings in the feedbacks by my testers. The first test subject to reach out to me after they started seeing the entity was Greg. He'd been in the dream longer than most of us, exploring, pushing the limits. And that's when I realized, the deeper we went into the dreamscape, the more powerful the entity became. It was growing, feeding on our fear and confusion. It wasn't just trying to scare us, it was trying to protect us from ourselves. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, I stopped caring about whether or not I was in control of my dreams. I stopped caring about being the one to fix the bugs. All I could think about was getting out, getting away. But the more I tried to escape, the more the thing followed me. Every corner, every turn, it was always there, watching, waiting, and the worst part, it felt like it knew me, like it was me. I think I've figured it out now. I've pieced it together, but it's too late. I was the one who went too far. I pushed the boundaries of human consciousness, thinking I could control it, thinking I could unlock something incredible. But now, every time I close my eyes, I'm trapped in that endless, terrifying void. I don't even need the Neuralink device anymore to send me to that hellscape. The connection, the gateway, it's permanent. And once it passes all the regulations, once it becomes accessible to you all, whatever monstrosity I'm facing will be waiting for you too. There's no escaping it. I'm doing everything I can to stop it, trying to cause enough disruption, enough problems, to make my company pull the plug on this damnable project. But I'm starting to realize the truth. I'm going to fail. I can feel it in my bones. No one would believe me, and even if they did, they'd just label me a madman, so I'm stuck, alone in this nightmare I've helped create. I honestly don't know how long I've been writing this. Time has become a blur, and to be honest, I'm not even sure if I'm still awake. But there's one thing I know for certain. If I don't find a way to end this, I'll be stuck here forever. And one day, maybe, I won't wake up at all, and neither will any of you. Because if this place is truly another dimension, if dreams are a separate world of their own, then we're all connected now, trapped together in this endless loop. And I'm starting to believe that none of us will ever make it out. I don't know what the fuck to do, and that's the scariest part. I'm still not sure what's happening, or if I'll make it out of this vicious cycle. So, here's my warning to you. If you ever get the chance to use something like Neuralink to step into that dreamscape, don't, because once you cross that line, there's no going back. You'll be lost in a world you can't escape. And when you try to run, that thing, that entity, it will be right behind you always, watching, waiting for you to finally crack. So let's see what happens. Maybe you'll know what to do when this post goes live, or maybe you'll just think I'm another crazy tech guy who couldn't handle the pressure. Either way, this is the story of how I created a nightmare, and I don't know how to wake up from it. But I'll try. There's a certain area of the Catskills that is hard to locate, but that certain unlucky hikers happen upon from time to time. At this place, the trees seem to exist in a perpetual state of decay, even during the sunniest, most flowery spring. The ground is gripped with weeds and littered with brown plastic bottles and sticky candy wrappers, and you'll rarely, if ever, spot any wildlife there. Sometimes, you might see a lone crow perched upon some high, precarious branch, and it'll stare at you perfectly still and quiet, seeming to warn you with its beady black eyes that you ought not venture any farther. When most people find this place, they know instinctively to turn around. They'll have some sort of sensation, something like a chilly wind blowing cold, wet leaves onto their neck, and they'll find themselves deeply uneasy. They'll perceive the eerie stillness of the place. They'll experience a feeling like they are standing in the woods in the middle of the night, even if it's the brightest morning hour, and they turn away. But not all do. If you decide to push onward from this point, you'll have to fight through a dense thicket of forest before eventually reaching a clearing, a wide expanse of flat land that might have been the site of some Puritan settlement that stood more than 200 years ago, only to be swallowed by the wilderness and lost to time. You'll see 5 or 6 stone chimneys standing alone, spaced fairly evenly apart. The wooden houses they once belonged to are all long gone, lost to fire from lightning strikes or simple rot from lack of upkeep. In place of these houses, the land is now dotted with primitive little huts made of sticks and mud, erected by the people who currently live there. If you search the grounds, you'll find artifacts like a metal lock that perhaps once joined together the wooden framework of a pillory, something that the village, for lack of a better descriptor, didn't have any need for nowadays. If you continue to explore this place, eventually you'll be surprised to come across a tall, imposing edifice, a whitewashed and steepled church, standing in the midst of the clearing, sturdy and pristine, even though it would seem no one is around to care for it. How it managed to survive for centuries, while the other buildings in the area seemed to easily give way to the elements no one in the village could ever figure out. I heard various rumors about this church when I was a member of the village myself. It is said that it once doubled as a school, and that around the late 1700s, an itinerant teacher, some say Irving's inspiration for Ichabod Crane, once taught there before he was summarily deposed and fatally mauled by the Winship, who has since called the church his home. The Winship is no headless horseman. He is no Bigfoot, no Jersey Devil, no skunk ape, no hog bear. He isn't even a rawhead or a bloody bones, and I don't think he's a Wendigo either. Rather, he's a creature with the body of a man, standing a little over 6 feet tall, weighing probably a little over 200 pounds. He has long, slender arms that are oddly stiff, as if carved from wood, and they are totally black, as if covered in soot. His hands are tiny, and always grabbing and reaching and fidgeting, like the hands of a tricky, conniving little gremlin or raccoon. His legs likewise are slender, but I never saw what they looked like, for he always wore navy dress pants to match his navy suit. Where he got this suit no one in the village really knew, but it was so modern-looking, we all figured he must have grabbed it off some hapless victim who wandered into his domain not very long ago. But then again, who hikes in the Catskills wearing such formal attire? The Winship's head is like that of a fox, or perhaps it's like that of a wolf, if a wolf had bitten into a can of orange spray paint and found his fur permanently stained. Or maybe the head was more similar to some orange coyotes, or maybe even a hyena. It's hard to say, really. It resembled the head of no other animal on Earth, but a fox or wolf or some sort of vicious canid with unnaturally bright, fiery orange fur is the best way I can describe it. Most of the people in the village were born there, with no outside knowledge of the world. However, some of the members of the village are outsiders, like I was. I came upon the Winship's domain when I was a young man newly graduated from Columbia. I devised a hiking trip in the Catskills ahead of starting my career, and I wound up trapped under the Winship's rule for years. I was one of the last immigrants, as it were, that the Winship accepted into his little country, for over time, he'd built up a sizable group of worshippers who'd multiplied by inbreeding, and he soon decided there was no need to let anyone else in. The Winship liked me, I'm deeply ashamed to admit, because in order to preserve myself, I became close to him and helped him keep the people in line. How he kept the people in line was by turning them against each other, for he knew that if they ever collaborated, they had the potential to overthrow him. For example, one day the Winship and I met in his church, and he squawked at me in his loud voice that was rough and sounded a lot like the cry of a bird of prey mixed with some sort of strange dinosaurian roar. He told me that he was angry at some of the first-generation villagers, the ones who'd come from the outside, because they were teaching their children not to be racist. Little boys, when they'd come across one of the village's few black members, would cry, with genuine terror, "It's a bear man, mummy!" spraying spittle everywhere because too much inbreeding had made their mouths oddly shaped and unable to properly hold all of their teeth. And the haggard mothers would say, speaking slowly and lifelessly, now, Donny, that isn't nice to say," or now, Johnny, that nice man ain't no bear." And the Winship simply couldn't have this. So he told me something had to be done to keep the distraction of racism alive and well, so the people would never get ideas to work together against him. So the Winship, in the dead of night, slunk into the woods and killed and skinned a black bear. Then he dressed me in the bear's fur and had me loot the huts of every white member of the village, stealing their weekly rations of berries and deer meat and anything else they happened to hold dear. I remember vividly finding artifacts from some of the people's old lives. Hiking gear, slips of green paper depicting George Washington that now, simply because they were in a new place, held no value, and even one or two dead smartphones that seemed to have indentions in them from people gripping them so hard, perhaps using them as mirrors, desperately searching for their old selves by looking through a glass darkly, or maybe imagining the photos of loved ones that used to be stored in their camera rolls. As you can imagine, my plundering in my bearskin suit caused quite the panic, and the morning after, when all the people's treasures were hidden in the Winship's church, he screamed that a certain black member of the village was to blame, a man called Lloyd, if I recall. In an instant, most every white member of the village turned on Lloyd, and the ones who didn't at first felt compelled to. They took stones and threatened to pelt Lloyd with them unless he gave them their goods back. I remember the animal fear in his eyes clear as day, him madly stammering that he hadn't taken anything from anyone, and trembling like a rabbit cornered by a fox. Seeing Lloyd was weak and vulnerable, the Winship lunged forward, caught him by the throat, hurled him to the ground and stamped upon his head, crushing it like a melon until blood gushed from his nose and ears. He continued his stamping, moving to Lloyd's neck and pounding into it as he screamed until his screaming finally died and his breathing ceased. After that, every other black member of the village fled in fear, escaping into the woods, taking their chances with whatever beast lay beyond, for none could be as horrible as the Winship. And just like that, there were significantly fewer people who could stand up to the Winship, and for a while he was pleased with this. But then, one day, he reasoned that there was still a good number of people left who could revolt against him. He thought about the upcoming winter, which was sure to be harsh, and how, despite his efforts to keep the village members safe from the cold in his church, several of the weaker ones would die off. He discussed with me if this was something he wanted, but then it dawned on him, mid-conversation, that if everyone was gone, he'd had no one left to worship him. I told him a bit sheepishly that he'd always have me, and then I frowned and felt my stomach drop, realizing just how nightmarish a scenario that would be. Sure, the Winship pouted, but I always want a crowd, you know. A big crowd full of people who love me and who look and act just like me. The Winship then hugged himself and cooed while he swayed back and forth. Then, in the next moment, He hatched an idea as to how to create more people that loved him, not just loved him, but looked like him, and acted like him. That's what he wanted. The reason why was clear to me from the moment he expressed this wish. He wanted to love as well as to be loved, and he knew well that the only other person he could ever love was someone exactly like himself. This was his genius new plan: impregnate the women himself, all of them. Being an educated man, I had doubts that this would work. The women were human and he was not. But that didn't seem to matter to him. The Winship announced his plan the following morning, telling every woman in the village that it would be a great honor and privilege to carry his child. The women, however, were unconvinced. Few gave in. Those who didn't, the Winship ordered me and a few other of his trusted confidants to capture if they attempted escape. I was reluctant to do so, to say the least, but I ended up not having to, for the Winship managed to reach down and ferociously grab any woman who attempted to flee from him. I heard their shrieks. I heard their wails of agony. I heard their lives, already plenty hellish, suddenly changed forever and exponentially worsened. And I did nothing. What could I do? I was but one man. Whether the Winship succeeded in getting these women pregnant, I don't know. But something did happen in the course of all this horror that helped catalyze my escape. The Winship pinned down someone whom he took to be another woman as the whole village gazed on. But in a matter of moments, he realized he was really sinking his claws into a long-haired man wearing a flowing garment that could easily have been mistaken for a dress, perhaps something he found discarded in the woods, perhaps something from the outside world one of the first-generation villagers had dropped somewhere. Before this, no one had ever bothered this individual for wearing what he chose or keeping his hair at the length he preferred. But after he humiliated the Winship, many of those who had given themselves over the Winship's lies turned on the man and beat him with their fists. "No man in woman clothes," they chanted in their slurred, slow voices as they dealt him vicious blows and scraped and shredded him with their long, dirty nails as he screamed in torment. "No man in woman clothes!" The only ones who didn't participate in the mauling and killing of this poor man were me and one of the Winship's other confidants, a dour-looking, white-haired man called Chance. I remember him glancing at me, mouth slightly open and shaking his head. For some reason, this incident was enough proof for him that not all was good in this place. And from that point on, the remaining members of the village were far more concerned with visions of duplicitous men in women's clothes, more than they were about any threat the Winship posed to them. Every November, the Winship, who keeps a calendar in his church in anticipation of the day, holds an election wherein the people insert slips of paper into a wooden box, writing the name of whom they want to be their leader into the harsh winter and through the next year. Of course, everyone always voted for the Winship, not just because they feared what he'd do if anyone voted differently, but because his church provided the only suitable shelter from the cold, and no one wanted to be shut out or worse. The election was simply the Winship's way of stroking his own ego, of proving to himself that there was no being alive or dead superior to him. Why the Winship thought this way remains a mystery to me, but I've since accepted that there really are some real devils out there, hidden in the black woods of treacherous mountains or brazenly stalking about our own courthouses and halls of government here in the civilized world. The people all lined up in single file in the midst of the village, a piece of paper clasped in their hands. These pieces of paper came from the church. They were pages from the ancient Bibles and hymnals and old-school textbooks that had been left behind by those who once worshipped and tried to learn there. For many of the villagers, the only word they knew how to spell at all was Winship, something their parents taught them specifically for the task of voting for him, so they really didn't have any option to vote against him even if they wanted to. The Winship, with me and his other confidants flanking him, held the box and grinned greedily as each villager submitted their vote, which they were required to write in their own blood. When all the votes were in, the Winship opened the box and began pulling out the slips. There were 27 villagers total at this point, and he expected no less than 27 votes for him. The Winship read each piece of paper with relish, seeing his name, as he expected, on every single one. But then, in the middle of his tallying the votes, his face fell, his snout quivered, thin snot began to steadily leak from his nose, and for a moment it seemed he might cry. Then his huge yellow eyes with their cat-like pupils bulged out of his head, and he erupted, roaring so volcanically and powerfully that the whole world seemed to shake. Then, bedlam. He hurled the box, striking a young girl in the head with it. He started tearing the slips of paper in his little hands, muttering obscenities and curses as people gathered around the girl, whose eyes were vacant and whose mouth was moving in what might have been a silent prayer. And then the crowd met his wrath. He swiped at them. He pounced upon them, and the whole throng, most of the people, scattered and yelled in wild terror, while those who could not bring themselves to stop loving the Winship watched his rampage in dismay, stupidly unaware that they weren't safe. In the chaos, I decided to flee, as many others were. The last thing I saw of the village was the Winship catching Chance in his claws as he was frantically waving at me, imploring in a louder voice as he could manage, "Get out of here, Ben! Get out of here while you still can!" I did, but not before lunging forward in Chance's direction, thinking I could somehow save him. But the Winship's sharp, vampiric teeth were already sinking into his throat, and his eyes were rolling into the back of his head as he emitted a horrible, agonized gurgling sound, and then the blood really began to flow as the Winship, now all beast, began shaking its head and growling voraciously as it tore into poor Chance's flesh. I ran. Many others ran with me, but to the best of my knowledge, they never made it out of the Catskills. By luck or divine providence or simply a good memory, I was able to identify my old hiking trail, and I made it back to society, to the real world. And I sit here typing this out as a kind of warning. My fellow Americans, truth is often stranger than fiction. Always be on the lookout for the devils and beasts of this world. Sometimes, like in my case, they are hiding far off the beaten path, but more often than not, they are hiding in plain sight, ready to strike at any moment. I pray you all resist before they do. Fight back if you must. And please, please don't run away like I did, leaving many people to die, crushing a piece of paper under my foot as I fled, a piece of paper with my name scrawled upon it. I've always been envious of other people's childhoods, the way they describe it. The country of the past was all golden sunlight and green fields and happy families and warm, safe blankets to curl up in, a longing sigh, the memory of starlight. I didn't have that. I don't remember much of my childhood, only snatches of images here and there, burnt around the edges. The twist of a long, bitter night, November wind whistling through the cracks in my bedroom window as I shivered under a pile of dirty laundry. The whispering ghosts of bruises on my upper arms, my lower back, my pudgy little legs. The teeth in the memory of laughter which was never, ever mine. The whine of mosquitoes and the squelch of mud as I weaved my way through the woods, sticking to the creek bottoms where no one ever came. It was safe there among the sticker bushes, the tight green tunnels with room only for an escaping rabbit or a small-bodied girl hiding from the big bad world that wanted to eat her. Those are my happy memories. Among the biting insects and stinging nettles, I was safe, at least for a while. I remember the day I first found the hanged man. I don't remember what I was running from quite. It could have been anything. The world was full of things to run from in those days. But I broke out of the drainage ditch I'd been following for what felt like miles into a space I'd never seen before. I stopped, shocked. I'd thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand, but this place was new. I'd emerged into a tiny botanic cathedral, a dome of green vines split by golden pillars of light that filtered down through the canopy far above. A silver filigree of spiderwebs scrolled between brambles, ornamented with glorious gold and green garden spiders like jewels, bigger than any I'd ever seen before. I was familiar with spiders. I was friends with the ones who lived in the crawl space under my house. They listened to my whispers with silent sympathy, carrying on their incomprehensible arachnid missions in reassuring peace. I'd never found them threatening, but I'd never understood how beautiful they could be, either, until I saw them in the diffuse, watery light of this new place. The floor of the Chamber of Vines was the bed of a stream, several drainage ditches flowing together. At this time of year it was mostly dry, puddles of standing water swimming with larvae and water striders and crayfish, but with plenty of large, flat rocks to skip between so my sneakers didn't get even muddier. It was dim in here, under the creepers, and I poked around the edges of the chamber first, in awe of the newts and jeweled beetles that skittered in the near darkness. Maybe that's why it took me so long on that first day to notice him. I don't know why I decided that the hanged man was a him, but the moment I saw it, it seemed obvious. At the very center of the dome of vines, high above my tiny head, hung a lump of wood entangled in a nest of creepers. It didn't look at all like a man dangling upside down, but my child's mind painted the picture, and it was immediately permanent, undeniable, and irrevocably named. I had found the grotto of the Hanged Man. I stayed for hours that first day, until it was too dark to make out the print of the book I'd brought with me in my flight after school. As I wormed my way out through the tunnel I thought would lead me most quickly to my house, I hoped I'd be able to find it again. I did. Nearly every day of that long, dark September, I squirmed through the mud back to my chamber of safety and stayed until the light above went out. The spiders thickened and then disappeared one by one, until by October, the place was bejeweled only by the changing leaves, and I brought an old blanket full of holes to wrap up in. And the whole time I talked to him, to the Hanged Man, who ruled this place as surely as I came in supplication to it. The drainage ditch cathedral became my temple, my confessional. I would talk to the Hanged Man about my troubles at home, the children at school who pulled my tangled hair and laughed at my dirty clothes, and he would listen. I was convinced of it, not like the spiders under the house, now mostly neglected except for the really bad nights, who didn't object when I talked to them as they wrapped up their prey, but weren't really paying attention. No, the Hanged Man truly heard me. He stored my words up in the rotting wood of his heart, and I poured them into him like the lonely child that I was. The Hanged Man couldn't speak back, of course, but sometimes when the wind sighed cold through the brambles, I almost heard him. It was only 2 months, but when you're 7 years old, 2 months is so much of a lifetime that it seems endless. When you're 7 years old, 2 months is such a big slice of everything you've ever been that it might as well be the whole cake. 2 months is an eternity. When you're 7 years old, 2 months can be a lifetime. It was a lifetime with the Hanged Man before I thought to ask him for anything. I could consider regretting at this point the fact that I ever did, but I know it was inevitable. Those in need, no matter how battered, eventually figure out that it doesn't hurt as much to ask for help as it does to keep muddling on without it. Unless, of course, the wish is granted, and that teaches a different lesson entirely. I was bleeding that day. I remember that. I think it was a split lip and a burning scalp, though all these years later I can't be sure. There were many small wounds in those days, but this time I couldn't hold back the tears. This time I couldn't escape into a fairy tale. This time I had to make my own. So I cried, flat out. I told the Hanged Man what had happened. I sobbed, I nearly shrieked, and I begged him for help. "Save me," I must have said, or something like it. "Please help me. Please don't let this happen again." I didn't think to place limitations. I didn't think to ask the Hanged Man for some things, but not everything. Not absolutely anything he decided to do, and even now, if I could go back and change it all, I'm not sure whether I would. I fell asleep in the grotto that night, eyes aching, breath raw. I'm not sure when I awoke, but I know only blackness met my eyes when I opened them. No moonlight, no starlight. It was the darkness of a sinkhole, of the deep places under the earth where sunlight never comes. And before I turned, shaking, and felt my way along the black passage out to the real world I'd run from, I heard the chill wind whisper from 1,000 directions, in one voice, "Yes." I picked my way through the woods, blind, until the sun peeped above the horizon. I was utterly lost, and I don't remember much about the morning until I found a road, and a man in a car found me, tattered blanket around my shoulders, all out of tears and words. He took me to a police station, and they took me to the smoking ruins of the house I'd lived in all my life, and all they found were bodies. Later, it was assumed I'd run from the flames and injured myself in my frantic flight. Later, it was assumed that a small child couldn't have caused the fire that started when the old, neglected stove shot a spark that ignited the tilting wooden house. Later, I mourned the poor spiders in the crawl space. That morning, as the sunlight filtered golden and watery through the windows of the police station, I knew only that the Hanged Man had listened to my plea. It did get better, though not much better, but when you're 7 years old and all you've known is pain, any little thing can be enormous, can be everything. I cried myself dry 100 times in my new, slightly improved home before I managed to escape and find my old familiar grotto again. It was spring by then, and the water was higher. My new sneakers splashed in the cold, clear water of ice melt as I explored the room. I was slightly bigger, it was slightly smaller, but it was the same vegetable cathedral, twisted and brown with the quickening of the year, not flowing and green with the end of summer, but very much the same place. It was only that the hanged man had gone. A few vines swung from the roof, empty, but the hunk of wood that I'd poured my soul into was simply gone. I looked around the floor of the space, but I knew I wouldn't find him. The hanged man had answered me, and the hanged man had gone. I've grown a life since then. It's not a very good one. Maybe it never could have been. Maybe the curse placed on me when I was young was inescapable, no matter what happened. Maybe this is the best it ever could have been. Or maybe it could have been better. Maybe, if I were older at the time, I could have phrased my wish more consciously. Maybe the hanged man could have granted me something else. Maybe I'd be a princess now in a castle, but I doubt it. After all these years, after all this education, I still believe that the hanged man was real. I still believe he heard me, and did everything a lonely forest spirit could to save me, and maybe that was the only wish I'll ever get. I touch my scars sometimes. I trace the spaces where the bruises used to be with soft fingers, and I remember, and I'm grateful that I found that space, that dim place in the woods. And I wonder what happened to the hanged man. I wonder what he was, to grant the deepest wish of a lonely, battered child who had no one else to run to. I wonder whether, when I die, it will be in a forest, far away from anyone who will find the body. I wonder whether I'll petrify into something that looks from a distance like a lump of wood. I wonder whether I'll be hoisted into the air by creeper vines, to dangle far above the head of a lonely child, marinated in stories, running from the world. And I wonder whether I'll disappear after granting the same wish. And I think there are far worse destinies. The Kansas Bleeder is not a killer or a monster, but a feminoma. To some, he is a gift from God, a miracle. To others, he's a close friend, or a relative perhaps, and still to others, he's a villain, a cold-blooded killer, or the devil himself. He may appear as a tree, a man, a phone, a toy, an animal, anything you want to imagine. The Kansas Bleeder has morphed into that. When I first heard of the Kansas Bleeder, I didn't know what to think. I wouldn't necessarily call him evil, a monster to be avoided, but you should follow his rules and make sure not to break them. His rules are very different for each person he meets, but his base rules are the same for each person that comes into contact with him. Here are the baseline rules. Do not mention of the Kansas Bleeder by it. Call him like you would to anybody. Some people even give him a name. Like Steve or James, others call him the last disciple and prophet of God. Never, ever anger him. You will have a life of misery and pain, and he will torment you forever. Never disrespect the Kansas Bleeder. Never talk back to him or degrade him. Although these rules seem strange, I think I have an answer for it that I cannot reveal to you right now. There are stories of him, a lot actually, that I have been able to get over the past 300 years. I have been able to digitize them here now, and I will share some stories with each post. Okay, that's all for now. April 15th, 1931. All of you have done evil to the sight of the Lord, one way or another. God has sent this terrible dust bowl towards each of your farms, and has destroyed them, and will keep destroying them until you repent to the Most High. A murmur went across the pitch-up tent. You have raised your hands against your brothers, and there have been weeping and gnashing of this lawless land. Repent, repent, I say, and all will be fine and dandy again. More murmurs start to rumble across the tent. How will we know when God has forgiven our souls? Said a farmer from the back. When God has told me that each and every one of you has repented, God will forgive you and will stop this hell that is happening, said the preacher. The preacher walked off the stage and sat down, rubbing the sweat off of his forehead. People started to exit the tent, but a young farmer came to the preacher and knelt down. Preacher, he said, see, I'm real worried. My pa and ma have been fighting each other real bad. They show up with busted stuff of all kinds. I need you, preacher. I need you to come help save ourselves from the wrath of God. I shall see what I can do, child, the preacher said. Is tonight good? Said the young farmer. Tonight shall be fine. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I promise not to waste your time. And with that, the young farmer walked away, determined to save his and his parents' souls and to have this terrible dust storm end. It was a calm night when the preacher finally made it to the young farmer's residence. The house looked like it got hit from every dust bowl that has ever happened in America. The windows were shattered, and glass littered the floor. The preacher walked up the stairway, careful not to step on the glass as he did. As he made it to the door, the preacher could not help but notice all the shouting that was happening on the other side of the door. The preacher knocked on the door 3 times and heard someone running and unlocked the door before opening it. "Ah, Preacher Wilson, it must have been a miracle from God that you're at my front door right now," said the young farmer. Please come in." As the preacher entered the house, a smell of fresh blood rushed at him. Every wall inside the house had dents in them. Blood splatters lined the walls as well. There was shouting and yelling coming from one of the rooms. "Preacher, please make yourself at home while I get my ma and pa." The preacher sat in one of the chairs as waited. He heard scuffled feet and turned to look at who it was. It was the farmer's parents. Each one of them had bruises, scarps, and cuts. The father had an ear and an eye missing, while the mother had most of her hair pulled out. "Ma, Pa, this is the fine preacher I've been talking about," said the young farmer. "He's going to help you both get better." The young farmer got stools and motioned for them to sit. "I take it that you two do not enjoy each other's company," said the preacher. There was no action from either of the parents. "I reckon you know what is going on around here." There was still no motion. Horrible, horrible times, and it has led me to read my Holy Bible 5, 6, maybe 7 times in the past 2 days. God has punished us here in this state, and I could not find out the reason why. We are God-fearing people, you know that. Most of us read the Bible and listen to what God has to say, said the preacher. I reckon that at a time, you two read your Bibles and listen to what our Lord had to say, but not anymore. God has forgiven you, but destroying each other's temples, destroying the wonderful gift that God has given you, is an evil, evil sin that shall not go unpunished. What do you mean? Said the father. I think I found my root cause, my gold. All this time I have been reading the Bible, wondering why God is punishing us, but I have forgotten that even though there are God-fearing people, there will always be snakes. Said the preacher, there will always be thorns, always be people who just cannot follow the rules, even if God, a loving and merciful God, has forgiven them time after time, and given them chance after chance to stop making mistakes. They refuse to follow the rules. God hates people that do not follow the rules, and so he punishes them, but of course their punishment does not only affect them, it affects everyone. The preacher glared at the two parents. And some people's punishments last too long. They have to be put down. May God give you resistance, and may he punish you accordingly. April 16, 1931. 2 huge wooden statues' shadows engulfed the whole town. Each one had a cage in them, and each one had the father and the mother of the young farmer in them. Bundles of the wood lay at the base of the statues. The townspeople surrounded the statues, with the preacher in the middle. We come here, dear people, to repay the sins of hateful for the Most High. These 2 sinners are the reason why people have died. These 2 sinners are the reason why a dust storm has engulfed this grand state. These 2 sinners are the reason all of your crops have failed to yield food and money. These 2 people, these evil, vile demons, are the reason why God has released hell onto us, and they must repay. We must make God happy again. The preacher gave a nod to a man in a black robe who lit the bundles of wood on fire. They shall repay. These demons shall be dragged to hell. They knew the results if they did not, would not turn to our God, and now they shall die. The statues erupted in flames, and the townspeople started to form a circle around the statues, singing Amazing Grace. The screams from the cages erupted. The father and mother gasped for air, trying to grab for anything that will get them away from the flames that now kicked them. By 1940, all of the signs of the Dust Bowl were gone. Kansas recovered, and farmers started to get food from their crops again. The preacher had gone after the burning, and he was never seen again. Some people say he's still alive and lives in the underbridge of some highway, but no one can deny he may or may not contributed to helping Kansas from disaster.